We're going to continue the third part of our present tense review with a look at spelling change verbs. The specific verbs that we're going to discuss today are UIR verbs, and these verbs will receive a spelling change in all forms with the exception of nosotros and vosotros. So, if you're following along in your notes, make sure you look for either spelling change verbs or UIR verbs. You may see them under either heading. One of the most important things to remember about spelling change verbs in the present tense is that we are talking about UIR verbs only. And these are verbs that end in UIR, not verbs that end in G, UIR, or Q, UIR. In Spanish, the G and the Q rely on that UIR to create a specific sound. The G with a U makes a G sound, and the Q with the U makes a K sound. If we were to make a spelling change with those verbs, it would drastically change the sound of the verb and would sound a little funny. So remember, right now we're just focusing on UIR verbs. And those verbs will receive a spelling change in all forms except for nosotros and vosotros. If you take a moment to look at the chart that I've written on the screen here for you, you can see this idea illustrated in the subject pronouns. All of the pronouns are written here for you: yo, tú, usted, él, ella, nosotros, vosotros, ustedes, ellos, and ellas. Now, if we look at these pronouns closely, you can see that some have been written in green and others have been written in red. And this is referring back to that rule that we just learned. UIR verbs receive a spelling change in all forms except for nosotros and vosotros. So, if you think about it like a stop sign, or a stoplight rather, green means go and red means stop. Or green means make a spelling change, where red means no spelling change needed. And if all else fails, you can always go back to the idea of the boot. If we draw a box around all of our subject pronouns that are included in a spelling change, it creates a shape that resembles a boot. And this can remind us that any subject pronoun within the boot receives a spelling change. Anything outside of the boot does not receive a spelling change. In order to make this UIR present tense spelling change, you will add a Y to the stem of the verb just before you add the present tense endings. And this will only happen if your subject is not nosotros or vosotros. If we take a look back at the 3 rules I gave you in a previous presentation for conjugating present tense verbs, you will see that in order to conjugate a verb, we need to first find our subject, second, drop the infinitive ending, and third, add our present tense ending. But with these UIR spelling change verbs, it's going to work a bit differently. Think of it as just adding one more rule or a half step between your second and third rules. You're going to find the subject, drop the infinitive ending, add a Y, then add your present tense ending. Let's begin with an example of a verb that ends in UIR, like huir. We can clearly see that huir is, in fact, a UIR verb. We can also see that huir is an IR verb. These two things tell us that number one, since it is a UIR verb, huir will receive a spelling change in the present tense. And since huir is an IR verb, it will use IR present tense endings. And just as a reminder, those IR present tense endings are o, es, e, imos, is, en. Now, back to huir. We're going to begin conjugating this verb by referring back to those 3.5 points we just discussed. And again, those points are 1. Find the subject. 2. Drop the infinitive ending. 2.5. Add a Y if necessary. And 3. Add your present tense ending. So now we're ready to conjugate the verb huir. I've left these steps for conjugation and your present tense IR endings at the top of the page so you may have a reference as we conjugate this verb together. As you can see, I've already completed the first step, and that step is to find the subject. Since I know that we're going to conjugate huir for all forms, I know that I'm going to have 6 different subjects represented. And those are my yo form, tú, usted, nosotros, vosotros, and ustedes. I have also completed the second step, and that was to drop the IR ending. So if you look, I have the stem for each subject pronoun, and that is HU. Because I dropped the IR, I'm only left with the stem in each form. So, steps 1 and 2 are now complete. Our step 2.5 is to now add a Y to those stems. Before adding the Y to any stems, I made sure to reference the charts that I wrote for us earlier. And I added the Y's for all subject pronouns except for nosotros and vosotros. And you can think of those as the green subjects or the subjects that are inside the boot. And those are yo, tú, usted, él, ella, ustedes, ellos, and ellas. And again, if you look over here, you'll see that nosotros and vosotros are without a Y. So, we have now completed step 2.5. The last thing for us to do is add our present tense endings. And all we have to do is look right up in the right-hand corner and see that our IR endings are here for us, and we just have to attach those to the stem of the verb huir. Now, it's very important when conjugating verbs to remember that the subject must agree with the ending. So, yo must agree with an O ending. Tú will agree with the es ending, and so forth and so on. And here you can see that we have finally completed the conjugation of the verb huir in the present tense. Now that we have added our y's in all forms except for nosotros and vosotros, we see that huir has become huyo, huyes, huye, huimos, huís, huyen. And that's how you conjugate a UIR spelling change verb in the present tense. And we have completed all of our steps in the conjugation. So now let's do a couple of practices with these UIR verbs.